Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is a bit of both really. We're looking at Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, which is an all-time classic arcade racer developed by Magnetic Fields and released by Gremlin Graphics in 1990. The reason I say it's a bit of both is because I never actually played the original when it was first released, but I did play a game that was heavily inspired by it. More on that in just a moment. This game itself was a legendary game at the time of its original release. It was one that was sort of spoken of in hushed whispers in gaming magazines at the time, and always sort of praised and brought up as kind of the yardstick by which all future races should be measured. Especially in its Atari ST and Amiga incarnation. A lot of racing games on the ST and Amiga got compared favourably or unfavourably to the Lotus series. So, about that game that was inspired by Lotus. So, Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge and its numerous successors would get console releases on the Sega Mega Drive, but it would also go on to form the basis of a Super NES game called Top Gear, which was released by Kemco. And Gremlin were involved with that, so this wasn't like an unofficial port or a bootleg or anything like that. It was done with the full involvement of Gremlin. It just didn't have the Lotus cars in it. But the interesting thing about Top Gear is that this is a game that has remained consistently popular over the years, particularly in Brazil, where there was a strong culture of sort of playing video games in public spaces. There were sort of public spaces that had consoles and you could sort of go and buy some time with them. And Top Gear became a particularly popular one because of its competitive split-screen multiplayer. And in fact, it was so popular that there's a lot of current Brazilian developers who are now making their own games that are inspired by Top Gear and by extension by Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, with probably the most noteworthy of those being Horizon Chase Turbo, which even went so far as to bring on board Barry Leach, who was the composer of the music for the Lotus series and Top Gear from the second Lotus game onwards. So yeah. But today we're going back to the start of that whole legacy. Let's go play Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge.
Okay, here we are with Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge. One of the finest racing games ever created, according to a lot of people. And yeah, it's good. It's definitely an all-time classic. And as I say, it's been a very inspirational game for a lot of developers over the years as well, both directly and indirectly. So, this is a 1 or 2 player game. It's split screen multiplayer, but if you're playing single player, it's still split screen, so you still only get half the screen. That's something that they updated in Lotus 2. So if you're playing by yourself, you got a full screen to yourself. That's also what Top Gear did on the Super NES as well. Okay, so number of players 1, easy 7 races. We'll go with computerized gears for now. Just to make things a bit easier, and the alternative control scheme, which is you press fire to accelerate and push up and down to change gears if you're using manual gears. Alright, how do we begin? We press the fire button, and we have the flickery background effect because we're playing from a pirate copy as usual, just to make loading and emulating a bit easier. Now, this is an outrun style sort of music select feature where if you're on track 0, you just have the engine noises, which are not lovely in this game because of the ST's capabilities. But then you got some cool tracks in here as well, some of which actually reappeared in Top Gear, courtesy of Barry Leach. Now, if I remember correctly, I don't think Barry Leach actually did the music for this one. At least not according to Wikipedia as well. I don't know if that's accurate or not. But Barry Leach was certainly the composer from the second game onwards, and he composed Top Gear and made use of a lot of these tunes as a basis for Top Gear's soundtrack as well. Okay, so the way this game works is it's a race to the finish. I mean, I know that sounds obvious, but they did actually change the format slightly in the subsequent Lotus games. In that Lotus 2 adopted a more outrun style approach, in which rather than trying to get to the front of a pack of cars, you had a time limit and you had to beat the time limit to checkpoints. Whereas in this one, you just have a set number of laps. And you have to make it as far forward as you can by the end of the race, while also bearing in mind your fuel level, which you can see over on the right hand side. And you can see your overall race progress in the meter that appears on the left of the play window as well. So you can see how far through each lap you are and how far through the whole race you are as well. So you don't have to win to progress. It's basically a tournament model. So you get a certain number of points according to where you finish the race. And we've got 2 more laps to make up 4 places if possible. If I keep crashing into road signs, that's not going to work though, is it? I've already fallen back a couple of places. I actually don't know if I prefer this game with the music or with the sound effects, because although the engine sound in this is kind of horrendous, I do find with driving games it's a bit easier to sort of judge things if you're using the sound effects. But because the ST's limited number of sound channels, they only have 3 sound channels, there wasn't any real way that they could do music and sound effects at the same time. And so basically, you can either play with music or you can play with sound effects, not both. We'll try the next race with sound effects. Okay, so it's the first race done and dusted. 20 points for me, ahead of Nigel Mainsail, Alain Phosphate, and numerous other parodies of Formula 1 drivers from the early 90s. So, the interesting thing about this game, note down at the bottom, it's got the track description and hazards. You have shallow hills and some roadworks laying close. This is a very British game. Oh, we can't change the music. You have to have the same music for all your tracks. Yeah, this is a very British game in terms of its sort of attitude and humour. So, like, the hazards in this, you got like roadworks and weather and slightly steeper than average hills, that sort of thing. I always rather like that aspect of this game. But as I've mentioned a few times before in this series, I was all about racing games with hills at this time in my life. So I always kind of wanted to play this game because it looked like it had good hills, and sure enough it does. I'm actually struggling to pass a lot of these cars. This game isn't a sim by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a racing game where you can't just hold down the accelerator and hope for the best. You do need to kind of ease off the gas a bit on those tight corners. And there was a visual convention in the Lotus series in that the sort of tightness of a corner was indicated to you by the density of the signs. So basically, the more signs there were, and the closer together they were, the tighter the turn was going to be. So there you can see there's only a few signs, so it's not a very tight corner, but there's quite a lot of them. So you know that's going to be a tighter turn that you'll probably want to slow down for. Right, on to the 4th lap. Okay, getting a bit more of a feel of it now. It is quite tricky to get ahead of the pack at the start of the race because, unlike a lot of games that say, oh, there's 20 cars ahead of you, no, in this one there actually are 20 cars ahead of you, and it is keeping track of where they all are. So it's not like some games where the cars are just sort of scattered throughout the rest of the track. At the start of the race, you really do have to jostle for position and get as far forward as you possibly can. But yeah, this is good. This is good fun. And one of those games that I'm sorry I didn't have the opportunity to play at all back when it was current, really. Because I would always see this in magazines at the time and hear people talking about it and think, oh, that looks really cool. But for one reason or another, we never got a copy of it. A lot of the games we got back in the ST era were review copies. And so we didn't buy a lot of ST games. I certainly didn't, because at the time the ST was current, I didn't have a lot of my own money. I mean, like, I got pocket money and stuff, but I didn't really sort of get enough to consider spending a lot of money on games. And ST games were quite expensive at the time. So they were anywhere between like £25 and £29. And this was early 90s, so that's quite a lot of money if you take inflation into account. The actual numerical value of games hasn't gone up a lot over the years. So that means, relatively speaking, games that we buy today for modern consoles are relatively cheaper than we would have had to pay back in the day. And so for like a new ST game, you really had to sort of be sure that you wanted it before you splashed the cash on it. Or you could wait for a budget release. Because budget releases tended to be a lot more reasonable. On the ST you could get stuff between about £5 and £10 on most budget releases. And as a popular game, this game would have almost certainly had budget re-releases as well. I don't think Gremlin had their own budget label. But there were budget specialists who kind of took other publishers' properties and put them out again under their own branding, so it may well have been a situation like that. Or they may well have just reduced the recommended retail price of the game over time. I don't know. But this strikes me as a game they would have wanted to get in the hands of as many people as possible, because it was so well regarded by both press and public at the time. And went on to spawn 2 sequels. As well as Top Gear, which we talked about in the intro. So I remember there being some debate over whether this first Lotus game or the second one... Oh, tried to stop in the pits, failed. I remember there being some debate over whether this Lotus game or the second one is better. Because certainly technically speaking, the second game is superior. So it's a bit more colourful. You've got the full screen single player option. You have more in the way of sort of weather effects and stuff as well. And so I remember when reviews for that game came out, it was sort of natural to assume that that was better. But over the years, it seems a lot of people have kind of gravitated a lot more towards this game's straight racing formula, rather than timers and checkpoints. So I don't know. It's probably just a matter of taste. Certainly the core racing action is very similar in both of them, so... Final lap. Stop. Give me some fuel. There we go. That should be enough. We lost a lot of positions doing that. Should have probably done that earlier in the race. These are quite long laps though, we can maybe make up a few positions. There's a couple more. Oh no! Oh, I lost all those positions I just got. All of them. Race over. Oh, I guess after a certain number of people have crossed the line, yeah, after 10 of them have crossed the line, then the race is over. Oh, and that does mean your game is over. Alrighty, well, let's have another go. And enjoy the psychedelic loading screens in the background. Like I say, those weird effects wouldn't have been there in the retail release of this. It's because the pirate versions of this were compressed. Those flickering effects are the data decompressing. Alright, let's try the medium races, see what a difference that makes. And let's play with the sound effects this time. Just so you can admire their majesty. Alright, Finland. Mainly gentle slopes, rocks lying on edges of road. Alright, and here we go with that lovely engine sound. I say, as terrible as that sound is, I do kind of find it a bit easier to judge what you're doing in a driving game if you can hear the engine. And that would be especially useful if you were using the manual gears. Because you'll be able to use the engine sound as an audible cue as to when you need to change gear. This is a tricky little course, isn't it? All those rocks littering the road. I mean, they did warn me. Yeah, now the pack's spread out a bit, it's a little bit easier to advance. Sometimes it's just about patience. Whoops. And not hitting rocks. Yeah, from... I don't believe the sound effects got any better in subsequent Lotus installments on the Atari ST, which is a bit of a shame. But, you know, you can't be too mad at it, because this game does run incredibly smoothly. Like, noticeably smoother than a lot of other races from the period. And that was a big selling point of this version. Alright, come on, let's see how far forward we can get. Oh. Oh. It's not going brilliantly. We are at least ahead of 10th. Get out of my way! The one thing Top Gear added over this that I rather like about Top Gear is that even if you were playing in single player, you had a second computer player on the bottom screen in Top Gear, and that was fun because it felt like you had a sort of particular rival that you should try and beat. And also, it was a bit of a shame you didn't have that in this version. Because obviously with the 2-player mode in here, the game is more than capable of having 2 screens going at the same time. But yeah, I guess that was something they thought of a bit later. Second, I'll take it. I will take it. Alright, so what do we have to deal with next? Just behind Nigel Mainsail. It's a respectable place to be. And just ahead of M. Carburettor. On to Thailand next. Rolling hills and sweeping bends. As you can see, you can tell it's Thailand because it's a different colour. That was one thing that got a bit better in the subsequent Lotus games. There was a bit more variety in the backgrounds. So like, I remember there being like, there was like a city level at night time and that sort of thing. Gave the whole thing a bit more variety. Well, like I say, not that this is bad, because the important stuff is always the courses, but you know, so it's nice to have some variety in the backgrounds and so on. It gives you a much stronger feeling of the fact that you're supposedly travelling around the world and going to different places. Oops. There seems to be quite long laps on this one. Might have to pit in at some point. Oops, excuse the motorcycle outside. As usual, it is the local youths being youths. Listen to the majestic roar of that engine. You know what, I'm going to pit now. And just top up. Are we only lost one position? I'm filling up half the fuel tank. That's certainly livable with. Whoops. Now, if we can just catch up with any of the other racers, who I can't even see. Oh, there's 8th place. I sailed past you, 8th place. Oh, no, I failed to corner. The beautiful sound of the Lotus engine at high RPM. Oh, poor old ST sound chip. You were capable of beautiful things on occasion, but much of the time we have whatever this is. I joke, but I have enormous affection for this dear old sound chip. Because I've talked about this before in a few places, but one of the things I really like about this era of computing is that all the different home computer platforms were noticeably distinct from one another. Like, you could tell them apart based on things like how the game sounded, or the colour palettes used, or the way they looked, or the resolution they were running at. These days, like every computing platform or gaming platform is very similar. If you look at a static screenshot of something, it's very difficult to tell the difference between a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One and a PC even. In some cases you can tell the Switch version apart. But even then, you need to know what to look for. You need to know what sort of effects the Switch version won't be incorporating, because it's a less powerful system. Whereas back in this era, at the very least you could look at this game and know it was a 16-bit game that was very distinct from the Spectrum, that was very distinct from the Commodore 64, from the Amstrad. And that's something I kind of miss. But it also means that the things that used to frustrate me about the ST back at the time, like the sound chip, is I had a friend who had an Amiga, and I always felt a bit inferior when I played a game on the Amiga and the sound was so much better. But like these days, I recognise the ST sound chip as one of those things that made it unique and distinctive. And so while I still take the piss out of this sound because it's terrible, I have a lot of affection for it. Oh, we got some oil slicks in the road. Quite a long race, but quite short laps, this one. Wonder if our... No, I doubt we'll have enough fuel for this one, so... Probably going to need to do a tactical pit stop at some point. Probably earlier rather than later again, because that seemed to work quite well last time. Let's see if we can get into the top 10. Because that's what we need to survive, at least. Ooh, those oil slicks are nasty. I thought they'd just, like, send your steering off, but no, they bounce you right over to the other side of the road. This one's not going super well. Struggling to get out of 14th. Move. Stand aside. Oh, you jerk. Alright, into 12th. th. Oh, God. Back to 13th again. And there's 14th. I feel this may be the end for us, dear viewer. Get out of the way! Oh no, it's all going wrong. It's all going so wrong. Basically, I just need to stop hitting things. Such as trees and other cars. And rocks and oil slicks. And, you know, everything. Stand aside, coming through. One world. Oh, it's so narrow here. And I'm running out of fuel. And I'm down to 18th. It's not fair. Well, time for a YOLO lap. Oh, that was going so well. What? I was hoping for like a ridiculous last minute comeback there. Don't think it's going to happen though. I also think I might run out of fuel before we reach the finish line. But we'll see. No, there we go. It's all over. Anyway, I think we'll leave that there for now. That is Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, an all-time classic racing game that you should very much check out if you are interested in the history of racing games. This was a very significant moment for the genre. And, yeah, an absolute essential from the 16-bit home computer era. And the 8-bit era as well. I know this came out on numerous 8-bit computers and was quite well regarded there as well. So, anyway, let's leave that there for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.